Another question here is that can the processes and sites to be audited be realistically audited off-site? Right? What do I mean by that? That's the second to the last bullet. Can the processes and sites to be audited be realistically audited off-site? If the answer there is no, because they are significant, they are highly critical, then by all means do not do the remote audit. So it's also very important here for you to consider the risk assessment. So take a look at the risk registers. And right away by default, if the process is significant or high risk, I would, as much as possible, find ways on how we can audit this on-site, not off-site. All right? So please take note of that. And another question here is that the last bullet, if you look at that, can you have a good interview, or can you have a good overview of the facilities? All right? Equipment, operations, controls, or can you have access to all these relevant information? So, because if the answer to those questions is no, then maybe the remote audit is not feasible. So what I'm saying here is that just like your typical on-site audit or the face-to-face audit where you do feasibility check, the same is true with the remote auditing. So you also have to make sure that remote audit is feasible. So many of these questions can only be answered after a visit to the site. So that's why certification body auditors would normally, as much as possible, go on site to do a stage 1 audit and check whether it's possible for them to do remote audits during the subsequent, maybe stage 2, or maybe during the subsequent surveillance audits. So to bear that in mind. All right, bear that in mind. Now, let's take a look at some background information first. Now, take note that there are 2 documents here you need to understand. I've already shown to you earlier the ISO 19011-2018. This is the auditing guidelines, right? We all know that. But take note as well that there's an IAF mandatory document. This is IAF 4, by the way, IAF MD4. So let me repeat that. That's IAF MD4. It stands for International Accreditation Forum Mandatory Document 4. So this is very important for auditors. You need to understand the contents of these 2 standards, because look at this. If you look at the IAF mandatory document, this basically lays down the ground rules for what documents are you going to use when you're auditing using ICT. All right. So if you're going to conduct audit remotely using ICT, make sure that you refer to these documents. I don't plan to dig deeper into these documents today, but we can have a separate discussion on this. Now, so take note of that. Let me just let's take a look at what should be considered when we're doing remote audit. So let's take a look at some remote auditing techniques here, and I'm also going to share with you a very important process in remote auditing, which is, of course, similar to that of on-site audit, which is risk and opportunities. Let me just close my screens here again and just talk to you directly. Okay, so we have seen the importance of remote audit and the benefits it has brought to our audit, as well as of course, the downside. So let's just understand that there's always that balance between the 2. Now, just for definition purposes, there are again, we're still talking about audit feasibility here. There are again 2 types of audit here. One, on-site. First is of course the on-site remote auditing. All right. So here, the auditor is at the organization sites and is auditing people, auditing activities, or processes that are off-site. And of course, the other one is off-site remote auditing, where the auditor is not at the organization, all right? Meaning to say they're doing remote audit or virtual audit. So those are the different types of audits that we're talking right now: on-site remote auditing, or off-site remote auditing, on-site, off-site. So when, of course, where you're off-site, you're not there, you're auditing using ICT or virtual platform. So like I said earlier, the first thing you need to consider here, the first step here is to ensure feasibility. All right? How feasible is the remote or off-site audit? Okay? So the first step is to ensure feasibility and determine what technology may be used. You have to be very clear with that. If auditors and auditees have competencies and that resources are available. So what do we mean feasibility, John? Feasibility also depends on the online connection quality. Right? This is always a common issue. No? Our internet is slow, so if there are issues like that, you might as well want to reconsider. A weak bandwidth or limited hardware capability may slow the process. All right, and that will greatly affect the efficiency of the audit. The audit process may be affected by the speed at which the auditee accesses and shows, evidence by video or through a tablet or computer. So please establish that first, the feasibility. That's why I strongly emphasize that you do this technical testing first prior to the actual remote audit. Okay. In one previous audit that we conducted, our auditee client, which is a big, it's a multi-billion organization, and they even had issues in their connectivity, by the way, to the point that during the audit they have to rent out the entire hotel room just to make sure that our audit becomes seamless. Of course, you'll say, John, we are a small organization and we might not have that kind of resource. The more reason here that you need to understand whether the remote audit is visible or not, because otherwise it's going to be an unproductive, counterproductive audit. So ensure that this is visible right from the start, all right? Visibility. The next point I'd like to raise with you is confidentiality, security, and data protection. So I've included that earlier in my opening introduction. So just to emphasize that, look at this. This is CSDP. No? So take note of CSDP. So confidentiality, security, and data protection. This is a very important component of your remote audit. What is this all about? Like I've said earlier, when you do audit, you're going to share information in whatever online document or file sharing platform that you're going to use. So how secured are these information? Okay, for example, you can go to the group chat right now, all right? Go to the group chat right now. And let's say we're doing remote audit and I'm your auditor, I'm auditing you. And let's say we are auditing your, say for example, procurement process, your purchasing, all right? I think all of you has purchasing or purchasing process. Now, if you are the auditees, if you are the auditee, what are records pertaining to your procurement or purchasing process that you need to prepare? Ito ha, sige. So we're auditing your purchasing remotely, your procurement process. You are the auditee. Type in the group chat right now, what should be records related to procurement or purchasing that you need to prepare and you need to scan and you need to send to me. All right, because I'm going to be requiring these documents. I'm going to be requiring these records. Type that in the group chat, okay? And we'll see. We'll see how significant these records are. Okay, I can see answers now. Contracts, bid documents. So thank you for sharing your PR, purchase requests. All right, what else? So now, those three vendor master lists, PR, VS request, annual supplier evaluation plan, purchase order, supplier list. From the sound of this, these are actually even contractual obligations. And this, by no means, are significant documents, purchase orders, and so on and so forth. So in your case, would you be comfortable? Would you be, how do you ensure security and confidentiality and protection of these documents? So if I'm the auditee, I'll be asking these documents. The first thing you need to establish is the CSDP, all right? Because you cannot just easily share those lists of accredited vendors. Those accredited vendors, they also have their own personal or proprietary information contained in the documents, and then you're sharing this in an online platform. You'll probably be storing that in a cloud sharing platform. So make sure that you have CSDP agreements, all right? Do not forget your CSDP agreements, confidentiality, security, data protection agreements. You'd probably have your DPOs with you. DPOs is the Data Protection Officer. If you're complying, of course, when you're complying with the Data Privacy Act, wherein all of us are required to comply with, make sure that your DPO and the DPO of the auditor or the auditing organization lays down agreements on CSDP. Is that clear? Confidentiality, security, and data protection. Now, having said that, if you're doing remote audit, let me just close my slides here again, just to talk with you directly here. I'd rather, want to talk with you face to face. I attended this training on how do you effectively communicate virtually, and one of the tips I got there is that from time to time you have to switch off your screens. And that's why I'm doing right now. The slide, so that I can just basically look at you and you can see me in the eyes. That's what it says there. So exactly like what I'm doing now. I hope it helps. So going back to CSDP, confidentiality, security, and data protection, what you can do there is come up with a list of those documents and records that you think should be available, should be scanned, should be placed in the folder, and should be readily accessible by the auditor. And once you have identified all those, make sure that they are covered by your confidentiality, security, and data protection. All right. Now, I just mentioned about documents, right? Visually, you can see documents, but take note that critical to the use of ICT, like we said, is the CSDP. Your auditor, or maybe in this case, your certification body and the organization should take into consideration legislation and regulations as well, which may require additional agreements from both sides. Let me give you an example. For example, here's an agreement between you and the auditor. There will be no recording of sound and images. All right. What should be included in that agreement? No, or apart from there will be no recording of sound and images, or authorization to using people's images. No? Can you actually take screenshot during the audit? So all of this should be laid down properly in the agreement, and possibly from the auditee itself, where applicable by national law. I've already mentioned the data protection officer of both the auditor and the auditee. Okay, so please do take note of that. So to prepare for the use of ICT, all certification, legal, and customer requirements, take note of that, all certification, legal, and customer requirements related to confidentiality, security, and data protection should be identified. Identify that. And actions taken to ensure their effective implementation. Going back to those examples you have typed in the group chat, I'm very sure those are covered by legal requirements. So you cannot just easily share those information without authorization. Those are covered by by your data privacy policies and guidelines. Is that clear? So there has to be also evidence of agreements. All right. So you cannot just say verbally, okay, we agree that you can take a look at these documents. There should be evidence of agreements as well related to CSDP. What is CSDP again? Confidentiality, security, data protection. So make sure that you have evidence of agreements related to the CSDP. This evidence could be records, agreed procedures, or even emails. Email would suffice. So the importance resides in having the CSDP criteria acknowledged by all participants. So make sure that both the auditor and the auditee acknowledge this, even if this is an internal audit. So make sure that your internal auditors also just sign these non-disclosure agreements. And as a matter of fact, after the audit, you may also have, for example, guidelines there that says you have to delete these documents and records from the online repository, or you have to delete that as a retained document for data protection. Okay, the audit team should prevent, all right, should prevent the access. Look at that, should prevent the access and retention of more documented information than it would in a normal face-to-face audit, because it is probable that the audit team will want to have access to more information to prepare for the audit. Normally, in our case, when we're auditing remotely our client, we come up with a list of documents and records that we want them to submit to us, apart from the procedure itself. Of course, procedure is part of the documentation. And so we call this asynchronous analysis. Okay, what is asynchronous analysis? There's synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous, of course, is real time. So screen sharing is synchronous, right? That's real time. We can look at your documents in sync, but there can also be asynchronous analysis. Asynchronous analysis in remote audit is when we ask you to submit to us documents prior or even during or even after the audit so that we can evaluate it. Did you get that? So the most important thing here, having said that, is this. It is important to reinforce trust in the audit process. All right. it is important to reinforce trust in the audit process between the auditor and the auditee. So it is a good practice that when documented information is to be analyzed in an asynchronous manner, it should also be shared in a secure and agreed system, such as cloud-based. I don't know what you're using. Maybe you have your own. One is SharePoint, for example. So one is Smart Sheets, whatever, or Trello. There are so many applications out there that you can use in record sharing using that, for as long as it's cloud-based. So we call that asynchronous. Okay. So there can be VPNs as well. What's VPN? The virtual private network. Or other file sharing systems. Whatever system you're using, make sure that they are covered by your CSDP guidelines or the confidentiality, let me repeat this, security, and data protection guidelines. Jong, wala kami niyan. You might as well have it written down. Because trust me, I think in the next 2 years, this is still going to be the norm as far as remote auditing is concerned. All right, you might as well lay this down already. For example, any screenshots of the documents or records or other kind of evidence should be previously authorized by the audited organization. Take note, I asked you earlier to list down your procurement and purchasing documents and records. So if those are the only documents listed and written in the audit charter, and then when they show a document on screen via share screen, it doesn't mean right away that you're authorized to also get a screenshot of that. So make sure all of these are carefully identified as well in your audit CSDP guidelines. All right, are we clear with the CSDP guidelines? No questions so far? Okay, now this time, let's talk about audit risk, virtual audit risk. That's virtual audit risk. No? So you're familiar with audit risk assessment, of course, doing it on-site. But what about virtual audit risk assessment? All right. Now, just going back to the feasibility, all right, going back to the feasibility and risk analysis for remote audits. Take a look at this. Now, again, here, I'm authorizing you to take a screenshot. Oh, by the way, this is recorded in our Facebook Live as well. You can always go back to the Facebook Live. But look at this. All right, feasibility and risk analysis for remote audit. So first and foremost, I've already covered their confidentiality, security, and data protection, as you have seen earlier. So ensure there's agreement between auditor and auditee about document or any arrangements to ensure them. All right. Second, as I mentioned earlier, is the use of your ICT. So there is stable connection with good online connection quality. The ICT allows access to relevant documented information. So take note that we also do observation during audit, right? That's why we have audit observation. So if observation of facilities, processes, activities, etc., is basically feasible in the use of ICT. What about people in the organization? So we're talking here of feasibility and risk analysis, all right? What about people in the organization? It is possible to access and interview people relevant to the QMS, because if you could not talk to them, then that defeats the whole audit, okay? They have access to internet. One time we were supposed to already audit a process owner in a site outside of their office, and only to find out they don't even have camera. They don't have mic. How can we talk to them? So make sure that it's possible to access and interview people. So we prefer, of course, that we see them in video so that we know that we're really talking to the person. Operations. If the organization is not operating regularly due to contingency situations, right, the processes, activities being performed are representative and allow fulfillment of the audit objectives. I just read that. What about complexity of the organization and the audit types? Like I said earlier, if the process you're going to audit is significant and high risk, then as much as possible, we also do a follow-up on-site audit, not just the remote audit. So it becomes partial remote. You do a remote audit and then you also do validation and verification on-site. So you really have to be on-site, all right? And that will complete the whole audit. So there's a combination of doing it remotely, and then you have to go there on site to also do validation and verification. And what about your conclusions? The audit objectives can be attained with a remote audit. No? So the audit objectives can be achieved partially. A remote audit may be done partially and later completed with an on-site audit. That's what I was saying earlier. The audit objectives cannot be attained by remote audit. If that's the case, then don't do remote auditing. Okay. Now, So more on risk analysis. So take a look at this. I'm going to share you another slide here. Yeah, it's showing up in your screens right now. So on the first column there, you can see information and communications technology. Let me just use my annotation here. Okay, so this one right here, information. This is the technology. Okay, because take note that that's the technology. How do we use it? What are the corresponding risks? And of course, what are opportunities? So for example, let's take a look at the ICT, the technology. Right now, we're doing video call. This is synchronous, real time. We're talking. I talk to you. You can answer synchronous, right? Like Skype, WebEx, Zoom, Hangouts. So the potential use, as far as the audit is concerned, is that you can definitely conduct interviews, right? Using Zoom in our case, no? Guided site tours, or even document review with auditee participation. That's okay. But what are the recent opportunities there? So if you look at the risk, look at this: security and confidentiality violations. I've emphasized that earlier. Differences in time zones. So if you're auditing someone from different time zone, maybe the authentication of the person. That's why we always prefer that there's image, there's video. We can see the person we're auditing. Low quality of communication, the possibility to observe the organization in a more autonomous and a free way is weakened, no? Because again, you're just looking at the video camera, or the possibility to observe reactions from several auditees, because this time you're only talking to one person. We all know, especially those who have been auditing, that when you do audit, I ask one person a question and I look and I observe at the reaction of the other. That's another technique that we're using, by the way. So, but that one is limited because you're just looking at one person, of course, unless otherwise you're also auditing them in sync simultaneously with several screens. That can be done. So now, if you look at the opportunities there, look at this interview. Sorry, let me go back to that. So interview with relevant personnel working remotely, all right, whether it's in home office or project teams. You can do opening, closing meeting. The travel time, cost reduction, and associated environmental impacts, greater geographical range, you can cover it. You can even bring in a lot of technical experts from all over the world, by the way, because now you just give them the link, they can be in the audit. All right, that's the beauty of this remote audit. Now, talking about documentation. So you can definitely use the technology in document review. So again, let me emphasize here, potential data manipulation is one of the many risks. All right. Of course, we've mentioned this already. Security and confidentiality violations as well, or the potential difficulty in responding to documentation requests. Now, let me just share this with you. This is just us. In our audits, we normally give the auditee 3 minutes to retrieve whatever document or records and then give it to us. So for example, during audit, there's one more document or record that we would like to ask as a sample, and it was not in the list and it was not prepared prior to the audit. We normally give that about 3 minutes. No? So having said that, you should prepare all these documents and records, organize it. The more reason you need to be more organized in your documents and records. So put everything in one folder. So just the other day, Clement and I were auditing a client, and we just simply asked for a copy of the risk register of the top management, and they could then produce that. And eventually, later on, they were able to produce after 1 day. So that speaks a lot about retrievability of documentation. So the more reason you need to ensure that in doing remote audits, you have to be very organized in terms of where do you store this, which folder, which file, which computer, which storage facility. Okay. Now, those are, of course, risks. And the opportunities, on the other hand, is that document reviews where site travel is not visible. You can easily do that in a remote audit. So this time around, you don't have to be on site. You just have to send the link, and that's it. No? So you can also do multi-site, good for remote audits, where site visit can be skipped, or where annual visits within the audit program are not necessary. Like I said, the typical travel time, cost reduction, and associated environmental aspects or impacts are just one of the opportunities there that we can get. Now, let's take a look at another example here. For example, here, still it's synchronous, right? Synchronous. We're doing synchronous video conferencing here. So look at this. You can also use drone or live stream, for example. So one time we were doing audit planning with a potential project in Burma, in Myanmar. And one of the agreed audit process there is this one, live stream. So because we have to, of course, witness running processes. How do they run the process in an assembly, for example, because it's a factory setup, by the way. And if we wanted to do guided site audit, of course, live stream can be used. Or how do we monitor or monitoring of remote or high risk work? Again, look at the risk. So the risk there would be the inherent risk is inherent in the use and presence of equipment, so or even the quality of image, or it's going to be quite difficult to verify the data, by the way. All right, so those are the risks. However, on the plus side there, you can at least have an assessment of what's going on in the assembly line. So what I'm saying here is they can use the tablet, all right, or they can use the CCTV surveillance camera on the location if they have. But if they don't have, at least just a tablet, just for you to monitor, to observe the end-to-end process in a production floor. So that can also be done. All right, that's synchronous. Okay, synchronous. And lastly, of course, is the asynchronous right here. So asynchronous. Asynchronous meaning to say video recording. So they can send you video recordings. So we're clear with synchronous and asynchronous there. So downside, security and confidentiality, veracity of the data. Where can you use video, asynchronous video? You can use that for process videos or call center video recordings, or even the recorded training webinars, just like what we're doing right now. This is later on recorded, uploaded in our FB Live, and this becomes an asynchronous data. Indeed, evidence that you attended the webinar, all right? And on the plus side there, the opportunities is higher profitability, the possibility of observing places where you normally could not do, but because of technology, you can access that. And if the electronic record contains sensitive data that the CSDP requirement considers not eligible for remote auditing, the auditor should consider reassigning the record review for on-site audit, all right? So these are just some risk and opportunities. I'm not saying this is all. Okay, these are just some of the risks and opportunities that you would normally encounter in a remote audit. Okay, so if you notice here, let me just close my slide. If you notice here, regardless of whether it is remote or on-site, the same audit cycle is observed. All right, so you again still go back to audit planning, which is of course evaluate the feasibility of the audit. How feasible is the audit? All right. So assess the document, assess and document feasibility and risk with the auditee, determine whether ICT is capable, define the agenda, allow the organization to identify the people to be audited, and make sure that they are available and they have access to whatever communication platform they're going to use. And so the same thing, whether it's remote or on-site. So you have to still start with the audit planning, the audit risk assessment, the audit execution, the audit reporting, and the audit conclusions. So what's important here is that you need to understand what are corresponding risks and opportunities that you would probably encounter during the audit. Let me just also emphasize that in case, all right, in case a high-risk situation is detected in the audit planning, in case a high-risk situation is detected, the audit should be on site. All right, the audit should be on site. That's written in the guidelines. All right, so the audit should be on site. So you'll just have to wait for the practical time, for the feasible time for you to conduct and verify on site. You may do partial audits remotely, but the audit is not closed until you do an on-site audit. So there are just things that you need to remember in doing audits already. Let's say you're already in the audit, you have seen the risk and opportunities, you have come up with an audit plan, now you're doing the interview. It is also important to ensure that there is no noise disturbing the communication, all right? While most of these functions, they have some noise cancellation features, that's good. So make sure that there's no noise disturbing. One time we were You probably didn't notice, but one time in our previous webinars, there's a huge backhoe operator just near our house here because I'm working from home, and I was so concerned that you will be hearing all those noise. A good thing that this Zoom has actually some noise cancellation. So make sure that you ensure that no noise disturbing the communication. If the auditor is auditing remotely off-site, all right, it should ensure there are no interruptions nor disturbance. So the same thing. Similarly, when there are breaks, ensure the sound is mute and image switch off to ensure privacy. How often do you forget that? You say, okay, mag-break muna tayo. Let's have a break. And then the, the microphone is still on. So ensure that the sound is mute and switch off the camera as well to ensure privacy. So these are just small things that you need to remember, okay? When using video for watching online live images of remote sites, it is important that the organization demonstrates veracity of images. You have to make sure that these are not just, of course, recorded images from 3 months ago, and now they're showing it to you as if it's currently happening. Okay, so if looking at images of a facility, this can be compared with floor plans. So if they're showing to you the image of their facility, make sure that you retrieve the floor plan and compare it so you can somehow verify. Say, for example, images of a geographical site. All right, if you're looking at the geographical site of a plant or a sub office or a field office, images of a geographical site that are observed can be compared with available satellite images if that's accessible to you. Satellite images or information available from a geographic information system or GIS. So the evidence and the way it was collected should also be recorded. How were you able to collect that? In a remote audit, it is important to also allow for small breaks. Don't forget that, because like they said, the virtual video conferencing fatigue is real. So make sure that in a remote audit, allow for small breaks. So while you may not do this in an actual face-to-face audit, you may want to consider this in a remote audit. So typical of those that usually occur in an unplanned manner and an on-site audit. So for me, it's really okay to have an unplanned break, by the way. So like I said, being seated and using the screen continuously can be tiresome. So to allow small intervals for stretching legs, reducing eye strain, helps to enhance attention when receiving feedback from your auditee. It is also acceptable for the auditor to inform the auditee when an interruption is required, because sometimes during remote audit, you especially if you would like to do an asynchronous document and record review, you need time to read and analyze a document, right? So tell your auditee that can we just have 5 minutes interruption here? I'm just going to read this document. I'm going to analyze this information that you just provided. So inform them that. So this allows for increased understanding of the documentation and evidence that has been presented to you. And of course, the auditee also will not wonder, how come it's so quiet, right? So if time is consumed, okay, take note of this as well. In remote audit, if time is consumed on issues such as network downtime, there's interruption. All of a sudden, they have internet issues, unexpected interruptions or delays, accessibility problems or ICT challenges. This downtime should not be counted as audit time. Did you get that? So this downtime should not be counted as audit time, all right? Now, so that's as far as audit execution is concerned. And then, of course, you go to the audit conclusion, right? So we're just following the same audit process. We're just doing it in its remote version. So when concluding your audit, I have 6 minutes left. Audit report should clearly state as well, all right? You should write in your audit report. You have to state in your audit report the extent of your usage of your ICT. Because of course, in a face-to-face audit, you don't need to put that. There's no ICT involved. But since you're doing remote audit, your audit report, we're now talking about the audit reporting. The audit report should clearly state the extent of use of information and communication technology, as well as the effectiveness of its use in achieving audit objectives. You have to write that down in your audit report. The audit report should indicate those processes that could not be audited and should have been audited on site. So the more important it is now to really clearly identify what are the processes that you're going to audit remotely and what procedures cannot be audited remotely. and should be audited on site. This information, my friends, is important for the decision process and your subsequent audits. Do not forget feedback from the audit team as well regarding the use of ICT. They'd probably tell you, you know what, it's better if we do the audit on site. No? Or they'd probably tell you, wow, we love these remote audits because you could not see as many evidence. So get feedback from the audit team regarding the use of ICT. So it should be given to the audit program manager, and the audit program or the audit team leader should use this feedback to update the risk and opportunities previously identified. So if you recall in the previous slide that I have shown to you a while ago, let me show that again. So this should be updated based on the feedback that you just have gathered from your auditees. All right. So we have covered the same audit process from audit planning, which basically includes initiation, determining feasibility, risk and opportunities, audit execution, audit reporting, audit conclusion. The same process applies in a remote audit. Of course, it's just that there are different sets of pros and cons because it's done via a remote setup. So that ends my presentation. Do you have questions or clarification? And Shaira is here. Shai, do we have questions or clarifications?
Hi, Sir Jong. Yes, sir. We have here in the group chat. So first question, this is from Miss Raquel. So is it possible for the auditee to know that someone is taking picture of the documents?
Oh, that's a good question. That's why there are a lot of limitations in a remote audit. Like, for example, right now, I'll never know whether someone from the audience is taking pictures, right? That's why, if you remember in my previous discussion, trust is a big issue here. You need to establish trust, by the way, in the entire audit process. While I did mention CSDP, confidentiality, security, data protection, you have to make sure that all of this are actually put in place. Your control measures may not be as extensively effective, but if you think there are trust issues in the audit process, you may want to reconsider doing remote audit. All right. I hope I answered your question, sir. The least you can do there is you have to make sure that you have CSDP guidelines, CSDP between the auditor and the auditee. So even those details involving are we allowed to take screenshots should be included in the CSDP guidelines. All right, so that you have something to hold on to when there are violations to that agreement. Good question. Next question, Shai.
Okay, so this is from Ms. Joanne. So since remote audits are prone to technical difficulties, how long should auditors wait for the auditee to present the documents requested?
Good question. I've mentioned earlier that this is not stated in the guidelines, but personally, in our practice right now, we are all new to this. We at least give 3 minutes. All right, we at least give 3 minutes. I think that's enough time for the auditee to be able to present his or her documents or records, and that would also be enough time for us as base. That's a good basis for us to check whether the documents and records are indeed organized, they are readily available, they are retrievable, in other words. You know? So it's a different story when they present that after 30 minutes. It's a different story when they present that after 1 hour or 1 day. Now there are potential issues already. Okay, good question. Thank you for that question. Shai, there is a question here sent directly to the Secretariat. How do we effectively address remote auditing risk? This is also a good question. You need to, as soon as you have identified all those remote auditing risks that I've given you in an example earlier, you need to sit down as an audit team, Sir Ron. No, this is from Sir Ron. You need to sit down as a team and gather your risk management team. You need to come up with your RTP here, the risk treatment plan. So I cannot give you a specific answer here because it depends again on what sort of risk are you facing here. So, but I think the example I can give to you right now, Sir Ron, is that when there are confidentiality, security, and data protection issues, make sure that you establish your CSDP guidelines, have it signed by you and the auditee, and make sure that this is clear between all interested parties in the audit. So because all audit risks are different, so you have to ensure that your RTPs are in place, or the risk treatment plans, and have it prepared prior to the audit. All right. Okay. Shai, back to you.
Okay, additional question from Miss Joanne. Do you recommend remote audits even for internal audits?
Yes, we all know that organizations right now implement skeletal workforce. So from organizations, let's say, for example, we have one client, Shai, you know this very well. It's a government agency, and they report to the office only 3 times a week, or they report to the office 4 times a week, and some process owners are working from home on a particular day of the week. So how do you audit that? Remote audit becomes the solution here. So for you to be able to interview someone working from home, there's no way for you to do that if we don't do remote audit. So that's a good question that you've raised there. So what I'd like to suggest here is that in your next audit, when you plan your next subsequent audit, make sure that you already include in your audit plan remote audits. All right, don't be left behind. This has already been the trend, the norm, and I see this is going to happen in the next many years. And so make sure that you include remote audit planning in your next audit plan. All right. Next question,
Okay.
Shai. Are there any more questions?
We have here from Miss Nerly. Is there an ideal timeline for auditor to give the auditee docs or records needed for them to prepare? Or is it a technique for it be given only a day before the audit?
Okay, I mentioned earlier 3 minutes. I think for me that's the ideal time to evaluate retrievability. And then another thing is that I also mentioned earlier that in a remote audit, make sure that your auditee knows exactly what documents and records to prepare. So give them a list of the documents and records that they need to prepare. Earlier, we did this quick exercise. I asked you to actually identify what are procurement and purchasing documents and records that you think you need during the audit. So as an auditor, you need to inform them what are these documents and records. If you're going to audit clause 4, context of the organization, what documents and records are they going to prepare? If you're going to audit, say, clause 6, risks and opportunities, what sort of documents and records are they going to prepare? So make sure these are identified way beforehand. And mind you, this is something that we've been doing already even prior to the remote audit. This is in the audit charter, by the way. The audit charter contains all the documents and records that they need to have. So if you're going to audit, for example, the audit process itself, obviously the auditee should prepare the audit plan, the audit checklist, what else, the corrective preventive action reporting, and so on and so forth. So they have to come up with a list agreed by both the auditor and the auditee, so that during the audit, it is seamless. They can present right away what documents and records would you like to verify. All right. Thank you, Ma'am Nerly. That's a good question.